I'm here to interview Ray today. We're discussing why people with dementia pay for their own care. And this is a personal experience of two brothers. One is you, Ray, being the carer, and then your brother Cyril being the brother you cared for. So on that note, Ray, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, as Tom said, my name is Ray Wren, and I looked after my brother for about 4.5 to 5 years before, unfortunately, he went into a care home because it got really, really too much for me. And I just really want to really speak about at this particular time the amount of money that carers, by and large, have to pay for their care, for the ones that they're caring for. And I think it's totally, personally, I think it's totally unacceptable. But it's a whole historical thing that has kind of happened, you know. I mean, recently, for instance, just to remind you who these people are, you had all the celebrations of Dunkirk. And a lot of the people that are a little generation older than me are kind of, who were living then as children through that Second World War. My own uncle, for instance, was shot down over France. So you kind of recognize things. And after the war, it was very, very difficult. People were quite poor. There was rationing on, you know, for another 7 years after the war. And it was only, there were no jobs around. So I think it is important from that area, this is where these people are emerging. Now, at the end of their lives, we're asking them to make more sacrifices. Linked up with this is the fact that this is the first point I would like to make about this, is about the payment of national insurance. These people have been paying national insurance, which was introduced in 1912, and then when the NHS was set up in 1946, it was also linked up with health and social care. But the national insurance was basically for people who had kind of lost their jobs or were ill. And I know it's developed over the last 50 or so years. However, that's what these people, whom we are now asking to pay for their own care, had to live through. And they have paid their national insurance for 40, 50 years. Now we're asking them to start paying again for their last, say, 20 or 30 years of their life. So where's all that money gone?
And at the beginning you said how expensive it is to be a carer and how expensive it is to care. What are the figures?
Yes, in this one, when we were looking, for instance, when my brother had to go into care himself, the pay we got for him was about £850 a week. £850 a week.
Is that for a standard, high, medium?
Yeah, I think that's about a medium. Usually, sometimes it's £1,000 a week, sometimes it's £1,200 a week, where people have to pay. And these are people, and this is the second point I want to make, these are people who are what we will call self-funders. If they have any of their money or their savings is above, we'll say £20,000, there's a threshold that the government has set up, they have to pay for their own care out of their savings. So for instance, my brother who had savings, and if we had to pay for his care in the care home ourselves, his savings would have run out in about 6 months. So the 6 months, and then after the 6 months, then we had to negotiate then with the council how we should make a contribution to his care, you know. So that's the first thing I want to say is, you know, let me express again, national insurance for 30, 40 years, now paying for their own care, you know, and I think this should not kind of be allowed, really.
That's right, because there's also the difference between social care and medical care. I was hoping you could...
That's right, and I think one of the difficulties is this whole thing about the state has separated out medical care and social care. So medical care is if you have some kind of disease, you know, or some kind of like cancer or heart attack or heart disease, then the state will pay for that. But dementia has been put under social care because I believe, it is much easier that way, that they don't have to pay for the care of the individual, And nobody tells you about the continuing healthcare funding, which is funding for people who have a medical disease. And they're supposed to, by law, I think anybody with, dementia should be told about this beforehand, and certainly before the council gets involved, and have what do they call it? Yes, an assessment of the continuing health care, but this is not told you at all. And again, you're struggling to have to pay a lot of these bills where in fact you could be, able to get continuing health care from the government. But I guess they don't allow you to know this because they don't want to encourage people spending their money.
Right. And you basically said that it took you you were caring for your brother between 4 and 5 years. And I was doing some research, and apparently the dementia team in Bristol only was established 2 years ago. So I was wondering, what did you do before the dementia came to Bristol, and how did you cope with it?
With great difficulty, right. Because it was all hit and miss. It was a new thing to me. It was only when, for instance, when my brother was going into care, and we found a place for him, which was after 4 or 5 years, that I realised dementia actually came under the mental health teams, and it came under the category, and they came. I didn't know it even belonged to that, and it was only when they spoke to me, when I was searching for a place which I had to do on my own, for my brother to go to, that I discovered, it was all part of the mental health team. It was just things like that. And at the beginning it was all hitting. One of the things is we get no training at all to be able to kind of look after and what to happen. So just as one little example, is, my brother loses temper a lot, really temper, and used to be abusive to me, and
verbally abusive.
Verbally abusive to me, and I didn't know what to do, and I was trying to keep him, quiet and all that. And it was only after a while I learned to just walk away from it and just go and sit in another room. But I got no training in that, and whereas people who are paid for caring, to do it, they're given all that training anyway. But the other thing is, just to do with this thing as being a carer, is that, Cyril was my brother, and then I became his carer. The whole relationship had changed, and I became not only his carer, but his carer manager. I had to take on a management role. Now, fortunately in my life, I've been in managers of different organisations, so I've been able to do it, but a lot of people can't do that. But you have to make sometimes life and death decisions, or decisions that you're not too sure about, Well, I'll give you an example of this. One was when he was in the care home, he fell ill. There was a locum doctor there who was kind of saw him, who phoned me at 2 o'clock in the morning, saying he still was unwell, and I thought he was actually dying, and I was still groggy from getting up, and then he said, well, he was actually implying to me we won't send him to hospital when he actually said it. Right. That we don't send him to hospital, we'll keep him and let nature take its course. And by that time I had woken up, and I got in touch with my other brother and his wife, who had power of attorney. We went to the care home, and we just said, no, get him into hospital. We were able to override, the doctor. Now that's an extraordinary decision to have to make, because most people who are elderly, if their relatives are elderly, they'll always go by what the doctor says, because that's the way they've been brought up. This is what the doctor says, I've got to do that, But because of my background, I could say, no, I could challenge that. The same happened with the certain pills that they were going to give him, and I knew they had terrible side effects, and I didn't want my brother going through that, so I said no to that. These are huge decisions, and that's why I call myself a manager. I'm just not somebody, a nice carer who makes meals and changes his underwear and all that. It's really quite difficult, to kind of manage a project, like this. And this is what carers day in and day out are being asked to do, without very much help, I might add, And I think when the dementia care team came in, they're brilliant, by the way, and they've helped a lot, with accompanying people on this journey. I really want to get back to that. I think we don't really understand the intrusion into people's lives about money. By and large, we as English society, generally, we are very secretive about our money. We don't talk about how much money we got, how much money we spend, etc., by and large. And but we do this, now for people who are, who have dementia. And if I was at a meeting once, and I said to all this, and so how much of would you tell me how much, what your salaries were, how much you paid for your mortgage, how many cars you've got, what's your children's education, how many holidays you go on. You just don't do this. The only other time I've ever seen any intrusion like that is when there's a court case going on for divorce. And I said when they're kind of having to share out all the goods. And yet we go and we're asking me on behalf of vulnerable people all these personal questions about their savings. And they would be horrified. These older people are horrified that people are actually, wanted to know all about their private lives and their private savings. And I think that intrusion, it almost comes on, I would suggest, like a social abuse of vulnerable people. People may be thinking I'm making an emotional kind of statement about this. However, just think about yourself and think about yourself, and you're not able to have actually control over your own kind of money, and somebody else is moving in to negotiate it.
Continuing about the money intrusion, what's going to happen, because we were talking about the assessment of your brother in late September and the continued care. What's going to happen if he doesn't get it?
I'm just going to make a decision about that. But just before that, Tom, I think the other thing I want to really kind of speak about is the whole thing about the job description that I've kind of done for,
yes.
The job description that I kind of done, because it is linked up with that question you're saying now. One day I was just kind of at home looking at this paid job description of paid workers, and I found out that, I did this, I do this, I do this, I do this. And then so I wrote out my own kind of mock one, and I found out, I was working 80 hours a week and only getting £80 from the attendance allowance, so that's £1, an hour. And I said I was I wasn't trained for this job at all, like most other workers were trained for. I was finding out that I had to kind of, make these decisions, as I mentioned before, which, I had no kind of experience of doing. So I was doing all this thing, and I worked out at the going rate of £17 an hour.
What you pay a carer?
Well, that would be what you pay a carer,
Right.
so £17 an hour for 4.5 years. Then it would come to about £285,000 the NHS owed me. And if I was to kind of say anything, I would say, well, if you want to pay, take it out of that. You can take it out of the money that you owe me. See, the other thing is, just on that level, because I think it is important, coming back to money, see, what really, really upsets me is, is costs for all the dementia people in this country, which is nearly 1 million now, it's cost £26 billion a year. The state only pays £8 billion of that. The rest, the other 18, I think it's 18, isn't it? Yes, 18 is paid by the carers and their families. 26 billion, 18 billion paid by carers and families, So I think the time has come, really, just for me, I would suggest, the time would come for me to kind of, at the end of September, if the situation arose where I had to make a decision, is that I wouldn't pay it. I wouldn't pay the negotiation by the council for me to pay some of my brother's.
Even if you did, it wouldn't last more than a couple of months.
Well, even if I did now, exactly, and and then it has to be negotiate, have to negotiate, keep negotiating. And I do not have, and most carers do not have negotiating skills.
It sounds, it's quite also time-consuming and emotionally draining to go through this process.
Sure. Well, exactly, and particularly, Tom, if you know what I mean, particularly, if you really want some more stats, over the last, 10 or 12 years, there's been a 175% increase in women with dementia, and over, I think the numbers here, 250% increase in men with dementia. And yet the social care budget has gone down by 6.4%, And so you say, where is that money going to? And I say to people out there, people of my age, I'm 73, most of the people I know, 10 years older than me, to work this out. Where has all the money gone that I put in, and my colleagues put in, and the carers put in the national insurance, which was there for their own, if they're out of a job or when they fell sick, where has that money, particular money, gone? Just to finish off this, right, there were the heroes at Dunkirk. These are our modern day heroes, and they're really, really unsung.
That's a very strong statement. On that note, I'd like to thank you both for sitting down on this interview.
Thanks very much, Tom.
And hope to chat with you again.
Yeah, thank you.